Shadows of Elria. The Archon's Vigil, Part 2. Copyright 2025 J.T. Williams. Chapter 7. Crystal Falls. Dawn broke over the eastern hills as Teuma and his ranger escort made their way toward the Crystal Falls rendezvous. The human army's camp was visible in the valley below, a sprawling city of tents and war machines surrounding the now sealed Mornathil. Messengers rode out in all directions, no doubt carrying news of the great victory to settlements across Taria. "They believe they've won," Dennis observed as they paused on a ridge overlooking the scene. "That the vampire threat is contained. For now, let them celebrate," Teuma replied. "The truth will come soon enough." They continued eastward, following game trails through forests untouched by the war. By midday, they reached a sheltered glade where a small stream fed into a series of cascading pools, a landmark that told them they were nearing the Crystal Falls. "We should reach the rendezvous by nightfall," Dennis calculated, studying the position of the sun. "If Captain Irat and the others made it out." Teuma nodded, too weary for unnecessary conversation. The climb from Mornathil had drained what little strength he had recovered, and the container of scrolls seemed to grow heavier with each step, but he refused to slow their pace or complain of his fatigue. Too much depended on reaching Saelmark with the knowledge he carried. As they entered a narrow ravine that would lead them to the falls, one of the rangers suddenly raised a hand for silence. They froze, listening intently. At first, Teuma heard nothing beyond the natural sounds of the forest. Then it came to him, a subtle wrongness. The birds had fallen silent, and the undergrowth rustled with movement too deliberate to be wind or animals. "Ambush," Dennis whispered, drawing his sword. Before they could retreat, figures emerged from the surrounding forest. Not vampires, but humans clad in the distinctive armor of Tarian border guards. Their weapons were leveled not at the forest, but at Teuma and the rangers. "Hold!" called their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a captain's insignia. "By order of General Harwin, all travelers in this region are to be detained for questioning." Dennis stepped forward, his posture non-threatening but firm. "We are Rangers of the North, escorting an elven dignitary to Saelmark. We claim right of passage under the Treaty of Twin Rivers." The captain's expression remained skeptical. "Rangers, perhaps," he acknowledged. "But how do we know your dignitary? Is it a vampire infiltrator? We've had reports of shapeshifters using such disguises." "I am Teuma, High Archon of the Star Song Circle," Teuma declared, summoning what dignity he could despite his bedraggled appearance. "I was imprisoned in Mornathil and escaped during your attack. I bear critical information for Saelmark." The captain studied him for a long moment, then gestured to one of his men. "Silver water test," he ordered. "Standard procedure for anyone coming from vampire territory." Dennis tensed. "He's already passed this test with us. We vouch for his identity." "Then he won't mind passing it again," the captain replied coolly. "These are General Harwin's orders, not mine." Teuma stepped forward, extending his hand as he had done for Captain Ira. "I understand your caution," he said diplomatically. "Proceed with your test." The soldier approached, producing a vial similar to the one the rangers had used. But as he uncorked it, Teuma detected a subtle difference in the liquid inside. Not the pure shimmer of true silver water, but something darker, with faint red undertones. In an instant, he understood. These were not Tarian border guards. "It's a trap," he shouted, leaping backward as the soldier lunged forward, attempting to splash the false silver water on his face. Dennis reacted instantly, his blade slashing across the soldier's arm. Instead of red human blood, black ichor spurted from the wound, revealing the true nature of their ambushers. Vampires. Disguised as human soldiers, The forest erupted into chaos as both sides abandoned pretense. The border guards shed their human appearance, revealing the elongated features and blood-red eyes of a Khan elite. The rangers formed a protective circle around Teuma, their silver-edged weapons gleaming in the filtered sunlight. "Run, Archon!" Tenes commanded, engaging the vampire captain. "We'll hold them here." But Teuma knew flight was impossible. There were too many vampires, positioned to cut off all escape routes. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a deliberate ambush, set specifically for him. Instead of fleeing, he set down the container of scrolls and centered himself, drawing upon his recovering magical reserves. The forest around them provided abundant natural energy to channel, life essence that responded readily to an Archon's call. As the rangers fought valiantly against the vampire force, Teuma wove a spell of concealment and misdirection. The air around them thickened, shadows extending and multiplying, until the forest itself seemed to shift and distort. The vampires faltered, suddenly unable to distinguish friend from foe. They struck at shadows, at each other, confusion spreading through their ranks. "This way!" Teuma called to the rangers, creating a path through the illusion that only they could perceive. Quickly! 3 of the rangers made it to his side, including Tenes, who bled from a gash across his shoulder. The 4th lay motionless among the undergrowth, his throat torn out by vampire fangs. "The falls!" Tenes gasped, supporting himself against a tree. "We can lose them there." Teuma nodded, maintaining the illusion as they retreated. The spell would not hold for long, not against vampires of this caliber, and not with his depleted strength. But it might buy them enough time to reach the sanctuary of running water at the Crystal Falls. They fled through the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter as the illusion did its work. By the time they reached the series of cascading pools that marked the approach to the falls, Teuma's spell had begun to unravel, his control slipping with each passing moment. "Almost there," Tenes encouraged, pointing to where the stream disappeared over a rocky ledge. Beyond lay the Crystal Falls, a 100-foot cascade of water that had carved a deep basin over countless centuries. As they approached the ledge, a figure stepped into their path, tall, elegant, and terribly familiar. Vesria stood before them, her burn-scarred face twisted in a triumphant smile. "Did you really think you would reach Saelmark, Archon?" she asked, her voice carrying easily over the sound of rushing water. "That Lord Elria would allow you to wander freely with what you know?" Teuma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spray from the falls. "He wants me to reach Saelmark," he realized aloud, "to deliver his message about the weapon." Vesria's smile widened. "Very good, but not quite right. He wants you to reach Saelmark, eventually. After I've extracted certain memories from your mind. Memories that might cause complications if left intact. The mother," Teuma guessed. "The containment. You want to ensure I remember only what serves your purpose." "Precisely, Tenes." And the other rangers moved to defensive positions, their weapons ready despite their exhaustion and injuries. They were outnumbered and outmatched, facing not just Vesria, but the vampire forces now emerging from the forest behind them. Teuma made a swift calculation. The edge of the falls was only yards away. Below lay the deep basin, its waters blessed by ancient elven rituals that made them anathema to vampires. If they could reach it, "You won't take me alive," he declared, gathering the last of his magical reserves. "And you won't reshape my memories to serve Elria's plans." Vesria's confidence faltered slightly. "Don't be foolish, Archon. Lord Elria wishes you unharmed. Surrender now, and your ranger friends may yet live." "Dennis," Teuma said quietly, not taking his eyes from Vesria. "The container. Make sure it reaches Saelmark. The ranger understood immediately. With a swift movement, he secured the container of scrolls to his back. Now, Teuma shouted, releasing his gathered power in a blinding flash of light that momentarily stunned even Vesria's vampire senses. In the confusion, Tennis and the other rangers broke for the edge of the falls. Vesria recovered quickly, lunging for Teuma with inhuman speed, but he had anticipated her move. Sidestepping, he used her momentum to send her tumbling past him, then sprinted for the ledge himself. Vampire shrieks filled the air as the pursuing Archon reached the clearing. Arrows whistled past Teuma's head as he ran, one grazing his shoulder with burning pain. The edge. He hesitated for only a heartbeat. Below, he saw Tennis and one other ranger already emerging from the water, having survived the plunge. The third was nowhere to be seen. Behind him, Vesria had regained her footing and was charging forward, rage contorting her features. Teuma stepped off the ledge just as her fingers brushed his robes. Gravity claimed him, pulling him down toward the churning waters below. As he fell, he heard Vesria's scream of frustration echo from the cliff above. A sound cut short as he plunged into the blessed waters of the Crystal Falls Basin. The impact drove the breath from his lungs, the cold shocking his system. For a moment, he struggled against the powerful currents. Then strong hands gripped his robes, pulling him toward the shore. Tennis dragged him onto a rocky beach, both of them gasping for air. The others? Teuma managed to ask between breaths. Darik made it, Tennis replied grimly, pointing to where the other surviving ranger lay, recovering. Lorin didn't. Teuma closed his eyes briefly, honoring the fallen. 2 more rangers lost to ensure his passage to Saelmark. The price was becoming too high. The container, he asked. Tennis patted it, still secured to his back. Safe, if a bit waterlogged. The scrolls are sealed in waxed leather. They should survive. From the cliff above came sounds of rage and frustration. Vesria and her forces could not follow them into the blessed waters. To touch them would mean agony for a vampire. Perhaps even final death for the weaker Archon. We need to move, Dennis said, struggling to his feet. The falls have multiple paths downstream. They'll try to cut us off at the lower crossings. Teuma nodded, forcing his exhausted body upright. The plunge into the basin had washed away the blood from his minor wounds, but the deeper fatigue remained, a bone-deep weariness that magic alone couldn't cure. How far to the rendezvous? He asked, retrieving a soaked but salvageable portion of his tattered robes. Not far, Henneth replied, helping Derek to stand. The meeting point is a cave system behind the lower cascade. Captain Era chose it because no vampire can approach. Not with that much running water as a barrier. They set off along a narrow path that hugged the river's edge, staying close to the water for protection. The afternoon sun filtered through the forest canopy, providing additional security against vampire pursuit. But Teuma knew the advantage was temporary. Nightfall would embolden their hunters, and even Vigil lords could endure brief exposure to sunlight when sufficiently motivated. Vesria was most definitely motivated. The path descended gradually, following the river's course downstream. The sound of the falls receded behind them, replaced by the gentler babble of rapids and smaller cascades. After nearly an hour of careful progress, they rounded a bend to see the lower falls. A spectacular 30-foot drop where the river split around a massive boulder before reuniting in a wide, shallow pool. There, Tennessee pointed to a dark opening partially concealed behind the smallest of the cascades. The cave entrance. If anyone survived Monatil, that's where they'll be. Approaching cautiously, they scanned for signs of both allies and enemies. The cave mouth revealed nothing. the falling water obscuring whatever might lie within. "I'll go first," Darek volunteered, drawing his remaining dagger. Despite his injuries, the ranger moved with practiced stealth, disappearing behind the curtain of water. Tense moments passed. Teuma and Tennis exchanged concerned glances, ready to either follow or flee depending on what signal came from the cave. Finally, Darek reappeared, his expression unreadable. "Come," was all he said, gesturing them forward. They followed him through the cold cascade and into the dim cave beyond. As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, shapes resolved into figures. Rangers, some wounded, others standing guard. And at the center of the group, looking battered but unbowed, stood Captain Ira. "Archon," she greeted Teuma, genuine relief in her voice. "We feared you hadn't made it." "We nearly didn't," Tennis reported, quickly explaining their encounter with Vesria and the disguised vampire forces. Ira's expression darkened as she listened. "An organized ambush," she mused. "They knew exactly where we'd rendezvous. Someone betrayed our plans." "Or they anticipated our movements," Teuma suggested. "Elria is ancient and cunning. He thinks many steps ahead." "Regardless, we can't stay here," Tigreya decided. "If Vesria knows of this location, she'll find a way to reach us eventually. Blessed water or no." She turned to address the assembled rangers. "How many made it out of Mornathil?" 17, counting your group," reported Mira, who sported a bandaged arm and several minor burns. "Less than half our original force." Ira absorbed this news with stoic resignation. "And our mission?" "Successful, after a fashion," Mira replied. "We disrupted the containment runes as planned, but the vampires were already evacuating when we arrived. It seems the human army's attack was expected." "Not just expected," Teuma interjected. "Encouraged. Elria wanted Mornathil found and attacked. He's playing a deeper game than simply waging war on the mortal realms." "What game?" Ira asked. Elma hesitated, organizing his thoughts. "I'm not certain yet, but I believe it centers on the Mother's awakening and the artifact beneath Saelmark. Vesria confirmed as much during our confrontation. Elmir wants me to reach the city, but only after my memories have been edited." "To what purpose?" "To ensure I deliver the right message about the artifact," Teuma explained. "One that will prompt the High Archons to remove it from its resting place." Understanding dawned on Ira's face. "So the weapon isn't a weapon at all?" "I suspect not," Teuma agreed. "More likely it's part of the binding that keeps the Mother contained. By removing it, we would be aiding in her release, rather than preventing it." A grim silence fell over the cave as the implications sank in. The artifact they had fought so desperately to reach might be the very thing they should leave untouched. "The scrolls," Teuma continued, indicating the waterlogged container Teneth still carried. "They may contain information to confirm or refute this theory. We salvaged them from Mornathil's archives during our escape." Ira nodded. "Then our priority remains getting you safely to Saelmark. Not to access the artifact, but to prevent others from doing so without understanding the consequences." "A task that grows more difficult by the hour," Denise observed. "With Vesria actively hunting us, and the paths ahead likely watched." "We still have some advantages," Ira countered. "The crystal falls connect to the river network that flows towards Saelmark. We can follow the waterways, staying close to currents the vampires cannot cross, and the human army's presence will divert some of their attention." She moved to a natural ledge where various items had been arranged. Weapons, supplies, maps made on birch bark. "I've been planning alternative routes since we arrived. The most promising takes us through the Whispering Marshes, then along the Silverflow River, to Saelmark's western approach." "The marshes are treacherous," one of the rangers warned. Not just bogland, but strange magics from the old wars. Precisely why the vampires avoid them, Elria replied. They fear what they cannot control, and the marsh magic follows rules even Elria doesn't fully understand. Teuma studied the crude map, recognizing the geography from his previous journeys between Saelmark and the human kingdoms. The marshes would add days to our journey, he noted with concern. Significantly increase our chances of arriving alive, Aya countered. We've lost enough rangers already, Archon. I won't sacrifice more on a direct route that Vesria almost certainly watches. Teuma nodded, accepting her wisdom. The marshes, then. But first, I need time to examine these scrolls. They may contain information crucial to our understanding of what awaits in Saelmark. Era gestured to a small alcove, deeper in the cave. You'll have privacy there. Meanwhile, we'll prepare for departure at nightfall. The darkness that aids the vampires will also conceal our movement along the river. As the rangers set about their preparations, Teuma withdrew to the alcove with the container of scrolls. Carefully, he removed its waterlogged contents, laying them out on a dry stone shelf. Most had survived their dunking in the falls, protected by waxed leather coverings and preservation spells worked into the parchment itself. The crystal he had pocketed earlier was intact as well. He set it aside for later examination, focusing first on the scrolls that seemed oldest and most significant based on their binding and seals. Hours passed as Teuma immersed himself in the ancient texts. Some were written in languages so archaic that even his extensive scholarship provided only partial translation. Others used cipher scripts that required magical decoding, draining more of his limited reserves. But gradually, patterns emerged. Fragments of history previously unknown to him. Accounts of the mother's first appearance during an even earlier celestial event, similar to the Blackmoon. Descriptions of the bindings created to contain her, not by the Dwemhar alone as Elria had claimed, but by an alliance of Dwemhar artificers and the first vampire lords who had rejected her all-consuming hunger. And most critically, details of the artifact beneath Saelmark. Not a weapon, as he had suspected, but a linchpin. The central component in a binding system that spanned all of Taria, with nodes in various locations that together maintained the mother's prison. When Denise came to inform him that they were ready to depart, Teuma looked up with the stunned expression of one who has glimpsed a truth too vast to immediately comprehend. What is it? The ranger asked, noting his reaction. Elria lied about almost everything, Teuma replied, carefully rewrapping the most important scrolls. But the greatest deception was about himself. He isn't merely containing the mother out of self-preservation. He helped create her prison in the first place. The Lord of all vampires worked with the Dwemhar? Dennis asked incredulously. Not just worked with them. Led them, Teuma corrected, tapping one of the scrolls. This account describes him as the bridge between worlds, who guided the Dwemhar to create a binding that would contain the mother without destroying her completely. Why would he do that? Why not simply destroy this threat? Teuma's expression grew troubled. Because he needs her. The mother is the source of all vampire power, the wellspring from which their immortality and abilities flow. To destroy her would be to destroy himself and all his kind. But he keeps her imprisoned but alive, Dennis reasoned. Yes, but there's more, Teuma continued. The binding was designed to gradually weaken over millennia, allowing controlled amounts of her power to flow into the world. Power that Elria and his lords could harness. But the Blackmoon's return has accelerated the process beyond his control. And now he seeks to what? Restore the binding? No, Teuma said grimly. He seeks to replace it with something new. A binding that he alone controls, that channels the mother's power directly to him rather than dispersing it throughout the vampire hierarchy. Tennis absorbed this information with the soldier's pragmatism. How does this change our approach? It confirms that the artifact must remain undisturbed, Teuma replied, gathering the rewrapped scrolls. But it also means Elria is more desperate than we realized. If he fails to establish the new binding before the old one completely fails, the mother will awaken fully. And even he cannot predict the consequences. As they rejoined the others, Teuma shared his discoveries with Captain Era. Her expression remained stoic, but he saw the concern in her eyes. So we face a choice between two evils, she summarized. Either Elria succeeds, gaining unprecedented power, or he fails, releasing something worse. There may be a third option, Teuma suggested. If we can reach Saelmark with this knowledge, the High Archons might find a way to strengthen the original binding, preserving the status quo until a more permanent solution can be developed. Era nodded, making her decision. Then we proceed as planned. The marshes will slow us, but they offer our best chance of reaching Saelmark intact. As the rangers made final preparations to move out, Teuma found himself drawn to the cave entrance, where the falling water created a translucent barrier between their sanctuary and the world beyond. Through it, he could see the last light of day fading from the sky, the first stars appearing overhead, and there, rising above the eastern horizon, the Blackmoon. Larger than he remembered. Its surface no longer entirely dark, but marbled with faint, pulsing red veins like capillaries on the skin of some vast creature. The mother stirred, her awakening progressing faster than anyone had anticipated. Time was running out for all of Taria. Chapter 8. Long awaited. Vesria knelt before Lord Elria in the heart of their new stronghold, deep within the Shadow Peaks. Unlike Mornathil's grand architecture, this fortress was austere and functional, a temporary base rather than a seat of power. The Archon escaped, she reported, her voice steady despite the failure. He reached the Blessed Waters before we could capture him. Elria regarded her silently, his black eyes unreadable. Around them, the highest-ranking Vadia lords observed the exchange with predatory interest. Failure was rarely tolerated in Elria's court, and Vesria had now failed twice to secure the Archon. The rangers escorting him? Elria finally asked. Reduced by half, Vesria replied, but still enough to provide significant protection, especially while they follow the waterways. And their destination? Saelmark, as expected. But they've altered their route. Our observers report movement toward the Whispering Marshes. This information caused a stir among the assembled Vadir. The marshes were notorious among vampires, a place where their powers waned and strange entities dwelled that were neither living nor dead, and thus immune to their influence. A clever choice, Illyrio acknowledged, one that speaks to the ranger's desperation. Shall I pursue them into the marshes, my lord? Vesria asked, though the prospect clearly disturbed her. Oh, Elria decided after a moment's consideration. The marshes would claim too many of our forces for uncertain gain. Instead, we will focus on the destination rather than the journey. He gestured, and the air before him shimmered, forming an image of Saelmark as seen from above. Its concentric rings of elven homes surrounding the central spire where the High Archons gathered. The Archon brings warnings and ancient knowledge, Elria continued. Warnings that will be heeded, knowledge that will be studied. The Archons will not act rashly once they understand what lies beneath their city. Then our plan fails, Cress observed from his position among the Vadia lords. It adapts, Illyria corrected. The awakening proceeds with or without elven interference. The artifact's power diminishes daily as the Blackmoon grows. Soon it will be weak enough for us to act directly. He turned to another Vader lord, Morvain, whose talents lay in siege and warfare rather than subtlety. Prepare our forces for a direct assault on Saelmark. Not immediately, but soon. When the Archon reaches the city, when the high Archons are distracted by his revelations, that is when we strike. Morvain bowed deeply. It shall be done, my lord. Though Saelmark's defenses are legendary, no enemy has breached them in 10,000 years. No enemy has had the advantage we possess, Elria replied, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The Mother's power grows with each passing night. Already, it allows us capabilities the elves cannot anticipate or counter. He returned his attention to Vesria. You have failed to capture the Archon, but you may yet redeem yourself. Find the traitor Celerin. He survived his fall into the deep tunnels. Our sentries report movement in the abandoned sections, beneath what was once Mornithil. The mountain is sealed, Vesria pointed out. How would you have me enter? There are ways still open to those who know where to look, Elria replied enigmatically. Crests will guide you to one such entrance. Take a small force. Elite hunters only. Celerin knows too much about our true plans. He must be silenced before he finds a way to warn the Archon. Vesria bowed her head in acceptance of the mission. And if he has already escaped the mountain, then find his trail and follow it to its end, Elria commanded. I want his head brought before me, regardless of where your hunt leads. As you command, my lord. As the council dispersed to carry out their assignments, Elria remained alone, contemplating the image of Saelmark still shimmering in the air before him. His expression betrayed nothing, but his thoughts raced across centuries of planning, of watching and waiting for the Blackmoon's return. So close now, the power that had eluded him for millennia almost within his grasp. If the Archon reached Saelmark with his newfound knowledge, it would complicate matters, but not prevent them. The binding weakened regardless of elven intervention. The Mother stirred, whether they understood the threat or not. In the end, all paths led to the same destination. A new order, with Elria's son no longer merely lord of all vampires, but master of a power the mortal races could scarcely comprehend. The wait had been long. It could stretch a little longer. Chapter 9. Whispering Marshes. The Whispering Marshes lived up to their name. Even in daylight, faint voices seemed to emanate from the mist that hung perpetually over the boglands. Whispers in languages no living creature spoke. Fragments of conversations long concluded by beings long dead. Teuma and the Rangers had entered the marshes shortly before dawn, following ancient pathways marked by standing stones, whose purpose and creators had been forgotten even by elven historians. The solid ground meandered through treacherous swamps, where bubbles of marsh gas occasionally burst with eerie blue flames. Keep to the path, Era warned as they proceeded single file. The stones mark safe passage. Stray even a few feet, and the bog can swallow you before anyone can help. Teuma needed no reminder. Even with his elven sight, distinguishing solid ground from deadly marsh was nearly impossible in the perpetual mist. He focused on following Tennis's steps exactly, trusting the Ranger's woodcraft to guide them safely. The whispers grew more insistent as they progressed deeper into the marshes. Most were incomprehensible, sounds rather than words, but occasionally phrases emerged that seemed eerily relevant to their mission. The Mother stirs beneath the mountain. Black moon rising, binding failing. The Lord of Shadows seeks the key. Teuma knew these were not truly voices, but emanations from the marsh itself, magical residue from the ancient wars that had transformed this region from verdant forest to haunted swampland. The mists absorbed memories, emotions, and knowledge from those who passed through, then released them randomly over centuries. What they heard were echoes, but echoes that sometimes contained forgotten truths. By midday, they reached what Eric called the crossroads, a circular arrangement of larger standing stones where multiple paths converged. Here, the mist thinned slightly, allowing them to see perhaps 30 yards in any direction before visibility faded again. "We'll rest here briefly," Era decided, signaling the rangers to establish a perimeter. The crossroads is one of the few truly safe locations in the marshes. The stones form a protective boundary that even the marsh entities respect. As the group gratefully sank onto drier ground, Teuma took the opportunity to examine the standing stones more closely. Each was carved with symbols that predated even elven writing. Curved, angular marks that seemed to flow into one another like water. "Dwemhar," he murmured, recognizing elements that matched descriptions in ancient texts. "You can read them?" Tennis asked, settling beside him with a water skin. "Not fully," Teuma admitted. "But I recognize patterns consistent with Dwemer-site binding. Spells worked into stone to establish permanent effects in a specific location." He traced one particularly complex symbol. "This one relates to dimensional stability, preventing unwanted connections between worlds." "Ingo's connections, like what links the vampires to the void?" Tennis suggested. "Possibly," Teuma agreed, impressed by the ranger's insight. "The Dwemhar understood more about the spaces between realms than any civilization before or since. They may have created these pathways through the marshes, specifically as refuges from vampire influence, which explains why Elria's forces avoid this place," Era added, joining their conversation. "The very ground rejects their nature." Teuma nodded, a new understanding forming in his mind. The marshes aren't just a geographical barrier, they're a magical one, part of the original binding system that contains the mother. This revelation caused the nearby rangers to look at their surroundings with newfound respect. "Are you saying we're walking through part of the same magic that keeps the mother imprisoned?" Era asked, her expression grave. "Not exactly," Teuma clarified, moving from stone to stone, studying their markings. "The binding's primary anchors are at specific locations, Mornithil being one, Saelmark another. But the Dwinvar understood the value of redundancy. They created secondary systems, buffer zones that would maintain partial containment even if primary nodes failed. And the marshes are one such buffer," Dennis concluded. "Precisely. Which explains why they remain magically active after so many millennia." Teuma's excitement grew as pieces of the puzzle aligned in his mind. The scrolls we recovered mentioned wetlands of forgetting as part of the containment architecture. I believe they refer to these very marshes. Era absorbed this information with the pragmatism of a battlefield commander. "Does this change our strategy? Can we use the marshes' properties to our advantage?" "Perhaps," Teuma replied thoughtfully. "If the marshes truly are connected to the binding, they may respond to an Archon's magic in ways they wouldn't to others. I might be able to—" He broke off, head tilting as though listening. The whispers that had been a constant background noise suddenly ceased, leaving an unnatural silence hanging over the crossroads. The rangers tensed, hands moving to weapons. Even without Teuma's warning, they sensed the shift. The marshes holding their breath. "Something approaches," Teuma whispered, his elven senses straining against the mist. "Not vampires. Something else." "Marsh entities," Era guessed, signaling her rangers to defensive positions. "They rarely bother travelers who keep to the paths, but we should be prepared." The mist thickened at the edges of the crossroads, swirling into vaguely humanoid shapes that drifted between the standing stones. 3, then 5, then a dozen. Pale, translucent figures, neither fully corporeal nor completely spectral. Don't attack unless they do, Ira cautioned her nervous rangers. Some are harmless, merely curious about visitors. You must study the entities with scholarly interest despite the potential danger. They resembled elves in their elongated limbs and graceful movements, but their features were indistinct, blurred suggestions of eyes, nose, and mouth, rather than defined characteristic. One entity, larger than the others, drifted forward until it hovered at the edge of the crossroads' central clearing. It extended a misty arm, pointing directly at Teuma. "Archon," it said, the words somehow forming without lips or breath. "You bring change." Teuma stepped forward, cautiously. "I seek passage to Saelmark," he replied, unsure if the entity would understand. "Purpose known," the entity responded. "Blackmoon rises. Mother stirs. Binding weakens." The other entities began a rhythmic swaying, their forms rippling as they moved. The whispers returned, building around them, until they seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Dangerous path. Shadows follow. Bloodseeker hunts." "Bloodseeker?" Teuma questioned. "Do you mean Vesria, the vampire who pursues us?" "God one, hate failed. She follows another path through our realm, seeks the Shadow Walker who escaped the mountain." "Celerine?" Teuma breathed, hope rising unexpectedly. "He survived." The entity's form rippled in what might have been affirmation. "Wounded, hiding, beyond the eastern pools where sunlight touches water." Ira stepped forward, her natural caution temporarily overcome by tactical interest. "Can you lead us to him? He's an ally, one who may have crucial information." The entity seemed to consider this request, its misty form pulsing slightly. "Dangerous diversion. Your path to the Archon city grows more perilous with each passing of the sun. The Bloodseeker brings death. We can't abandon him," Teuma decided. "Not if he escaped Mornithil with knowledge that might help us understand Ellery's true plans." The rangers exchanged glances, their expressions mixed. Protecting Teuma remained their primary mission, but Celerine was both ally and fellow agent in the war against the vampires. "How far is this meeting place?" Ira asked the entity. "Half-day's journey, eastern path, beyond the weeping stones." Ira considered briefly, then nodded. "We go together. I won't divide our forces, not with Vesria hunting us." The entity drifted backward, its form beginning to dissolve into the surrounding mist. "We will guide. Follow the lights. Stray not from their path." As it spoke, small blue flames appeared at intervals along one of the stone-marked trails leading from the crossroads. Marsh lights that hovered just above the ground, creating a clearly visible path through the swirling mist. "The entities are aiding us," Teuma observed with surprise. "What? The marshes, remember?" came the fading reply as the entity dispersed completely. "They remember when the Dwemhar and the bridge between worlds created the binding. They remember the price paid. They remember the betrayal." Before Teuma could question further, the entity had vanished entirely, along with its companions. Only the blue flames remained, marking their path forward. "I don't like this," Vorn grumbled, checking his bowstring. "Marsh entities are unpredictable at best, malevolent at worst. They are connected to the binding," Teuma reminded him. "If they're acting to protect it, helping us reach Celerine serves their purpose. Or it serves some purpose we don't understand," Vorn countered. "Either way, it's our best lead," Ira decided. "If Selena escaped with information about Elria's plans, finding him takes priority." She surveyed her remaining rangers. "Rest while you can. We move out in 15 minutes. As the group prepared to continue their journey, Teuma returned his attention to the standing stones, searching for any additional insights that markings might offer. One symbol in particular drew his focus, a pattern resembling a crescent moon intersected by a vertical line. "The Blackmoon," he murmured, tracing the carving with his fingertip. "The Dwemer knew it would return." The stone felt warm beneath his touch, responding to his Archon's magic in a way it wouldn't for others. Beneath the surface symbol, deeper patterns revealed themselves to his magical senses. Layered spells of protection, preservation, and something else. Something that felt like a lock waiting for the right key. Teuma withdrew his hand reluctantly. There were secrets here that deserved weeks of study, but time was a luxury they couldn't afford. The mysteries of the standing stones would have to wait for a more peaceful era, if such an era ever came again. "Ready, Archon," Tennis called, the rangers having completed their brief rest. Teuma nodded, turning away from the stones. "Lead on. Let's find Saelmark before Vesria does." The eastern path took them deeper into the marshes than Teuma had anticipated. Here, the mist grew thicker and the whispers more coherent. Fragments of conversations, warnings, and prophecies that seemed to dance at the edge of comprehension. Binding fails at 7 points. The mother hungers for both worlds. Bridge between worlds seeks dominion, not balance. The blue flames guided them unerringly, appearing just ahead as previous ones faded behind them. Occasionally, marsh entities would materialize briefly alongside the path, observing their passage with detached curiosity before dissolving back into the mist. By late afternoon, the landscape began to change. The standing stones became less frequent, replaced by twisted trees whose pale bark seemed to glow with a faint luminescence. The ground grew firmer, rising slightly above the surrounding boglands. "The weeping stones can't be far," Hera observed, checking their position against what little she knew of marsh geography. "The entity said Saelmark was beyond them, where sunlight touches water." "What are the weeping stones?" Teuma asked. "A landmark," Tatnis explained. "A circle of standing stones like the ones at the crossroads, but these constantly exude water that runs down their sides, hence the name." As if summoned by his description, the formation appeared ahead. 7 tall monoliths arranged in a perfect circle. Each stone glistened with moisture that seemed to seep from within the rock itself, creating small rivulets that joined to form a narrow stream flowing eastward. "Follow the stream," Hera instructed. "It must lead to the pools the entity mentioned." The blue flames continued to guide them, now following the stream's winding course. The trees grew more numerous, creating a canopy that filtered the late afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. Despite the inherent danger of their situation, Teuma found the setting strangely beautiful, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the natural world continued its cycles, undisturbed. The stream eventually widened, feeding into a series of interconnected pools whose crystal-clear water reflected the sky above. Unlike the stagnant bog water of the marshes proper, these pools seemed fresh and clean, with small fish visible darting beneath the surface. "Sunlight touches water," Teuma murmured, scanning the area for any sign of Saelmark. "But where would he hide?" Dennis pointed to a rocky outcropping that jutted over one of the larger pools. "There, look at the shadows beneath those stones." At first, Teuma saw nothing but darkness beneath the overhanging rocks. Then, as his eyes adjusted, he detected movement. A figure pressed deep into the shadows, watching their approach with wary alertness. Hera stepped forward, hands held open at her sides to signal peaceful intentions. "Saelmark of the Shadow Watch," she called softly. "We come as allies. Archon Teuma is with us." For a long moment, there was no response. Then the figure emerged partially from the shadows. Gaunt, wounded, but unmistakably Celerin. The vampire transformation remained evident in his pale skin and slightly elongated features, but his eyes had lost some of the blood-red intensity that marked full Icarn. "Archon," he acknowledged, his voice raspy from disuse. "You survived." "As did you," Teuma replied, relief evident in his tone. "The entity told us Vesria hunts you. She has been persistent," Celerin confirmed, stepping fully into view. His condition was worse than Teuma had initially assessed, his clothing torn and stained with both red elven blood and black vampire ichor. A deep gash across his chest that seemed resistant to healing. His overall bearing that of one who had pushed beyond exhaustion. "You're injured," Ira observed, gesturing to one of her rangers, who carried medical supplies. Celerin waved off the offer of assistance. "Save your medicines. My condition complicates healing. Only time and blood will restore me." Seeing their expressions, he added, "Animal blood suffices. I have not fallen so far as to hunt thinking beings." "How did you escape the mountain?" Teuma asked, keeping a respectful distance. Despite Celerin's assistance during his own escape, the rangers remained wary of his vampire nature. "The deep tunnels?" Celerin replied, gingerly seating himself on a flat stone near the water's edge. "Passages older than Monothiel itself, connecting to cave systems that run throughout the mountains. I navigated them for days before finding an exit far from the vampire forces. And came here," Tennis observed. "Why the marshes?" "Because vampires avoid them," Celerin explained. "The wetlands reject our kind. Something in the water and mist weakens vampire abilities. I am less affected due to my incomplete transformation, but even I find it uncomfortable. Yet you chose discomfort over safety," Teuma noted. "Why?" Celerin's expression grew grave. "Because I learned the truth about Elria's plans, and it's far worse than either of us suspected during our brief conversation after your escape." He glanced at the sky where the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "Night approaches. We should find better shelter before I explain further. Vesria's hunters may not venture deep into the marshes, but they patrol the edges, watching for exactly this kind of meeting." Ira nodded in agreement. "The entities showed us this location, but offered no protection beyond their guidance. We'd be wise to move on." "I knew a place," Celerin offered, struggling to his feet. "A structure of Dwemha origin, perhaps a half-hour's journey from here. It offers both shelter and protection against vampires sensing magic." "Can you travel in your condition?" Teuma asked with concern. Celerin's mouth twisted in a bitter smile that revealed the tips of his fangs. "One advantage of my condition is endurance beyond normal elven limits. I will manage." The blue flames that had guided them thus far flickered and died as they prepared to depart, suggesting the marsh entities had fulfilled whatever obligation they felt toward the travelers. Celerin took the lead, moving with careful precision despite his injuries, following a barely visible path that wound between the pools and into a denser section of the strange, luminescent trees. As they traveled, Teuma moved alongside him, keeping his voice low. "In Monothiel, you mentioned the mother, the progenitor of Elria himself. The scrolls we recovered confirm much of what you told me, but suggest a more complex relationship than simple fear." Celerin nodded wearily. "Elria didn't merely help create the binding that contains her. He orchestrated it, not out of altruism or concern for the mortal realms, but as the first step in a plan spanning millennia. A plan to harness her power for himself," Teuma guessed. Yes, but with a specific purpose you may not have discovered in the scrolls. Celerin glanced back to ensure the rangers were far enough behind to not overhear. Elria seeks to become what the Mother is, a being of both void and physical reality, able to exist in and control both simultaneously. The implications staggered Teuma. Such a transformation would make him virtually unstoppable. Precisely. Neither mortal nor purely vampire, but something transcending both. A godlike entity with dominion over both realms. They fell silent as the path narrowed, requiring single-file movement through a particularly dense cluster of trees. When they emerged into a small clearing, Celerin pointed ahead to where a structure became visible through the thinning mist. A circular building of dark stone, partially overgrown with marsh vegetation, but clearly artificial in origin. The Dwem Hall waypoint, he explained, one of several they established throughout the marshes for travelers and researchers studying the boundary between realms. As they approached, Teuma noted the distinctive architecture, smooth curved walls without visible joins, as though the entire structure had been poured as a single piece rather than constructed from individual stones. A single arched doorway provided entrance, its surface inscribed with the same flowing script he had observed on the standing stones. "Will it admit a vampire?" Era asked practically, eyeing Summerin with clear concern. "It has so far," he replied with grim humor. "The Dwenha are built for functionality, above all. The structure keeps out the mist and predators, and dampens magical emanations that might attract attention. It passes no moral judgment on those who shelter within." As the group filed into the waypoint, Teuma was surprised by the interior. Despite its modest external appearance, the space inside was both larger than expected and remarkably well preserved. A central fire pit dominated the circular room, surrounded by stone benches arranged in concentric rings. The ceiling rose to a domed peak, where a circular opening admitted the fading daylight while somehow keeping out the ever-present mist. "The rangers should establish a watch rotation," Caesarion suggested, lowering himself onto one of the benches. "The waypoint offers protection, but not invulnerability." Era nodded in agreement, dispatching pairs of rangers to guard positions around the structure's perimeter. The remaining group gathered near the fire pit, where Dennis efficiently started a small blaze using dried wood stacked along the walls, left by previous travelers, or mysteriously replenished by the waypoint itself. Once the fire cast its warm glow throughout the chamber, Celerin continued his explanation, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. Adja's plan has always been about transcendence, becoming something beyond even the Mother herself. The binding was designed not merely to contain her, but to gradually siphon her power into reservoirs that he alone could access. The black pools in his throne room, Teuma recalled. They were part of this system? Yes. For thousands of years, the process continued as designed. Slow, methodical absorption of void energy that Elria used to strengthen himself and his closest lords. But the Blackmoon's return accelerated everything. The Mother's power grew faster than the binding could safely channel it. Forcing Elria to abandon Mornithil, Ira interjected, following the logical progression. "Not abandon. Repurpose," Saelmark corrected. "The entire mounted fortress is being transformed into a conductor. Massive magical apparatus designed to channel the Mother's full power when the binding finally fails." Teuma's mind raced with implications. "And the artifact beneath Saelmark, the one he wanted me to help retrieve? It's the control mechanism," Solen explained. "The final component that would allow him to direct the power flow. Without it, the Mother's awakening would be chaotic, destructive, possibly consuming Elria along with everyone else. With it, he becomes the conduit through which her power flows into our world." How certain are you of this? Teuma asked, his scholar instincts demanding verification before accepting such a radical theory. I found records in Monothel's deepest archives, Celerin replied. Journals in Eldria's own hand, dating back to the first binding ceremony. He never intended the containment to be permanent, only to last until he had prepared himself to receive the mother's full power. The group fell silent, contemplating the enormity of this revelation. If true, it meant the war against the vampires was merely a distraction, a side effect of Illyriel's true agenda, rather than his primary purpose. This changes our approach, Teuma finally said. The High Archons must understand, not just the danger of the artifact being removed, but the greater threat of Elria's planned transformation. Which is why I risked remaining in vampire territory despite my injuries. Saelmark agreed. This knowledge must reach Saelmark. And it will, Hera assured him. We'll rest here tonight and continue at first light. The Silverflow River isn't far beyond the eastern marshes. Once we reach it, the journey to Saelmark becomes considerably safer. As the Rangers settled into their positions for the night, establishing watches and attending to their equipment, Teuma took the opportunity to examine the waypoint more closely. The interior walls he discovered were covered in the same script as the standing stones and the entrance arch, flowing symbols that spoke of boundaries, transitions, and protection. But there was more. Interspersed among the functional inscriptions were what appeared to be historical records, accounts of the Dwemer's studies of the void, their encounters with entities from beyond the physical realm, and their eventual alliance with certain vampire lords to contain the greatest threat of all. They knew, Teuma murmured, tracing the ancient writing with his fingertips. The Dwemer knew Elria's true intentions from the beginning. Yet they helped him, Celerin observed, joining him at the wall. Because the alternative was worse. The complete consumption of our world by the void. Teuma nodded, reading further. They accepted a controlled threat over an immediate catastrophe, as we may have to do again, Celerin suggested grimly. Before Teuma could respond, one of the Rangers on perimeter watch burst into the waypoint, his expression urgent. Movement in the trees, he reported tersely. Multiple figures approaching from the north, too deliberate to be marsh entities. Hera was on her feet instantly, signaling her Rangers to defensive positions. Numbers? Identification? At least a dozen, the scout replied. Moving in formation. Their silhouettes. He hesitated, then finished reluctantly. They move like a car. A cold dread settled over the group. If vampire forces had penetrated this far into the marshes, they were being hunted with unprecedented determination. Vesria, Celerin confirmed, his expression darkening. She must have tracked me, despite the marsh's protective properties. How long do we have? Teuma asked, already gathering his few possessions. Minutes at most, the scout estimated. They're moving cautiously but directly toward this position. Hera assessed their situation with a commander's efficiency. The waypoint offers some protection, but we're outnumbered. If these are elite hunters, we need to move now. There's a secondary exit, Celerin revealed, moving to what had appeared to be a solid section of wall. The Dwemer always built escape routes into their structures. He pressed a specific sequence of symbols, and a portion of the wall slid silently aside, revealing a narrow passage that sloped downward into darkness. It leads to a small dock on one of the deeper marsh pools, he explained. From there, we can take water routes that the vampires will be reluctant to follow. Go, Hera commanded. Tanis, Mira, take 5 Rangers and escort the Archon and Celerin. The rest of us will hold here and misdirect the pursuit. No, Teuma objected firmly. We've lost too many already. We all go, or none go. There isn't time to argue, Hera replied, her tone brooking no further discussion. The knowledge you and Selen carry is more important than any individual life. That's the oath we took as rangers, to protect the greater good above ourselves. Before Teuma could protest further, sounds of combat erupted outside. The distinctive hiss of vampire attackers meeting the first line of ranger defenses. They're here, the scout reported, unnecessarily. Northeast perimeter breached. Go, Hera ordered again, drawing her twin short swords. We'll buy you as much time as we can. With a heavy heart, Teuma allowed Tennis to guide him toward the escape tunnel. Severin paused at the entrance, exchanging a meaningful look with Hera. Stay within running water as much as possible, he advised her. It's your best defense. She nodded grimly. Get them to Saelmark, whatever the cost. The escape party entered the tunnel just as the waypoint's main entrance exploded inward in a shower of stone fragments. Through the dust and chaos, Teuma caught a glimpse of Vesia's scarred face, her expression a mask of cold fury as she led her Igarn hunters into the chamber. Then the hidden door slid closed behind them, sealing off the sounds of battle as they descended into the darkness beneath the marshes. The stones react to your presence, Archon, Saelmark observed, watching the phenomenon with evident concern. Your magic resonates with what remains of the binding. Is that good or bad? Tennis asked practically, keeping his weapon trained on the nearest vampires. Known, Saelmark admitted. The binding systems were designed to respond to Archon magic, but this anchor point is damaged. Its reactions may be unpredictable. From among the Igarn on the far shore, a figure stepped forward. Vesria, her scarred face visible even through the mist. Unlike her warriors, she showed no hesitation in approaching the water's edge, her confidence suggesting either immunity to its effects or simply a willingness to endure pain to achieve her goals. A valiant attempt, Archon, she called across the pool, her voice carrying easily over the water. But ultimately futile. Lord Elria has committed significant resources to ensuring you do not reach Saelmark. At least, not with your memories intact. You can't hope to capture all of us, Tennu shouted back, defiant despite their dire situation. Some will escape to carry the knowledge. Vesria's laughter was cold and cutting. I don't need to capture all of you, only the Archon and the traitor. She gestured to the surrounding Igarn. The rest of you are merely inconvenient obstacles. As she spoke, the churning at the center of the pool intensified. Bubbles of marsh gas rose to the surface, igniting into eerie blue flames that danced across the water. The damaged stones pulsed more strongly, their broken symbols now glowing with steady light. Teuma felt a pull from the energies being released, a resonance with his own magical nature that both attracted and repelled. The anchor point, damaged as it was, recognized him as an Archon and responded to his presence. An idea formed in his mind, desperate, potentially catastrophic, but possibly their only chance of escape. Selena, he said quietly, not taking his eyes from the awakening stones. If I were to channel power into these stones, what would happen? The vampire elf's eyes widened as he grasped Teuma's intent. Theoretically, a surge of Archon magic might temporarily reactivate the binding properties, but in this damaged state, the effects would be unpredictable, possibly dangerous to all present, including vampires, especially vampires. Saelmark confirmed. The binding was specifically designed to repel void energies, which flow through all of vampire kind to some degree. Then prepare to paddle with all your strength toward that gap, Teuma instructed, indicating a narrow opening between two groups of Igarn where the channel continued northward. When I give the signal. he'll find you. Over Zephyr, pretend knowing seals, it was a gamble, though their only remaining option, with enemies closing in from all sides. Vesria, perhaps sensing their intentions, signaled her forces to move in. "Take them now," she commanded. "Kill the rangers if necessary, but bring me the Archon and the traitor alive." The Igarn advanced, some wading into the water despite the pain it caused their kind, others using the massive tree roots as bridges to approach from above. The circle tightened around the three coracles, now clustered at the center of the pool near the churning water. Teuma closed his eyes, drawing upon his recovering magical reserves. Despite the days of flight and minimal rest, he found his power responding more readily than expected, the proximity to the binding anchor point somehow amplifying his natural abilities. He extended his awareness into the damaged stones, sensing the fractured patterns of the original binding. Though broken, the fundamental structure remained, a connection to the larger network that still held the mother contained beneath what had once been Mornathil. "Ready," he murmured to his companions, power building around him like an invisible storm. The water beneath their boats began to glow with a soft blue light, responding to his channeling. Vesria sensed the danger too late. "Stop him!" she shrieked, abandoning caution to splash into the water herself, racing toward Teuma's boat with inhuman speed. "Now!" Teuma shouted, releasing the gathered power directly into the broken anchor point. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The damaged stones flared with blinding light, their broken symbols suddenly complete once more. The water of the entire pool transformed, taking on the same luminescence as blessed water used against vampires. Every Ikan touching the water screamed in agony as their flesh began to smoke and dissolve. Even those on the shore or tree roots recoiled from the sudden surge of anti-void energy that pulsed outward from the reactivated anchor point. Vesria, caught mid-lunge toward Teuma's boat, took the brunt of the magical backlash. Her body convulsed as the purified water touched her, the scarred side of her face beginning to crack and crumble like ancient parchment. But even in her agony, her determination remained unbroken. She continued forward, one hand extended toward Teuma, her eyes blazing with hatred. "Paddle!" Penis shouted, driving his boat toward the gap in the Ikarn line that had opened as the vampires retreated from the transformed water. The rangers responded instantly, their coracles surging forward with desperate speed. Teuma maintained his channeling, though the effort drained him rapidly. The anchor point, awakened from centuries of dormancy, pulled at his magic with increasing hunger. "You can't maintain this," Celerin warned, seeing Teuma's face grow pale with exertion. "The binding will drain you completely if you don't break the connection." "Not yet." Teuma gasped, holding on until the boats cleared the pool and entered the northern channel. Almost there. Behind them, Vesria had collapsed to her knees in the shallows, her body still smoking from contact with the blessed water. But her eyes remained fixed on the escaping boats, her voice rising in a promise that chilled even Celerin's vampire-cooled blood. "This isn't over, Archon. When the mother rises, I will personally ensure you witness the end of everything you cherish, before granting you death." As the last boat cleared the pool, Teuma finally released his hold on the anchor point. The magical connection snapped, sending a final pulse of energy across the water that caused the remaining Ikarn to flee in terror. Only Vesria remained, kneeling in the shallows, her once beautiful form now permanently marred by both fire and blessed water. Physical manifestations of the hatred that consumed her. Teuma slumped forward in the boat, utterly drained. The channeling had taken nearly everything he had, leaving him hollow and cold. Tennis reached back to steady him, concern evident in his weathered features. "Will he recover?" the ranger asked Celery, who had moved his boat alongside Teuma's. "Eventually," the vampire elf replied, checking Teuma's pulse with experienced fingers. "Archon magic replenishes itself given time. But he'll be vulnerable until then, limited to minor spells at best." "Then we'd better make the most of our head start," Dennis decided, signaling the remaining rangers to increase their pace. "That trick won't stop Vesria for long, and we still have miles to go before reaching the Silverflow." As they navigated the narrow channel away from the scene of confrontation, the colored mists began to thin further, replaced by normal daylight filtering through the trees. They had escaped the deep marsh, emerging into the more navigable outer wetlands that would eventually lead to the river network flowing towards Saelmark. The journey was far from over, but they had survived their most dangerous crossing. Behind them, in a pool surrounded by once again dormant stones, Vesria slowly rose to her feet, her damaged body already beginning the unnatural healing process of her kind. She turned to the few Archon who had remained at a safe distance from the blessed water, her voice barely recognizable through her rage and pain. "Return to Lord Elria," she commanded. "Tell him the Archon and the traitor continue towards Saelmark. Tell him..." She paused, touching the ruined side of her face, where new damage made her previous burn seem minor by comparison. "Tell him Vesria requests permission to lead the assault on the elven city, personally." As her messengers departed, Vesria stared in the direction the boats had vanished, her hatred a palpable force that seemed to distort the very air around her. "Run, Archon," she whispered. "Run to your precious Saelmark. It will become your tomb." For 2 days, Teuma drifted in and out of consciousness as the rangers navigated the remaining marshlands and finally reached the blessed currents of the Silverflow River. The magical exertion at the broken anchor point had depleted him more severely than anyone had anticipated, pushing him to the very edge of his substantial reserves. During his periods of lucidity, he was aware of Celerin's constant vigilance, the vampire elf monitoring his condition with a healer's precision despite his own unhealed wounds. The hybrid nature of Celerin's transformation gave him insights into both elven and vampire physiology that proved invaluable in treating Teuma's magical exhaustion. "The binding drew more than it should have," Celerin explained to Tennis during one such lucid interval. "Being damaged, it lacked the normal limitations that would prevent draining an Archon to this extent. Will there be permanent effects?" Teuma managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "Unlikely," Celerin assured him, "but your recovery will be slower than usual. We need to reach Saelmark where the High Archons can assist with specialized restoration techniques." The journey down the Silverflow passed in a blur for Teuma. The rangers had abandoned the fragile marsh coracles for more substantial riverboats, acquired from a friendly settlement along the banks. These craft moved swiftly with the current, eating up the miles between the marshes and their destination. Occasionally, Teuma would rouse enough to note landmarks passing by. The distinctive Three Sisters rock formation, the ruins of an ancient elven watchtower, the massive bridge spanning the river where it narrowed before the final approach to Saelmark. Each signaled their growing proximity to safety, yet also to the confrontation that awaited with the High Archons. By the dawn of the 3rd day, the spires of Saelmark appeared on the horizon, gleaming white and gold in the morning light, a vision of elegance and power that had remained unblemished for 10,000 years. The city occupied a massive plateau overlooking the confluence of the Silverflow and Eastern rivers, its concentric rings rising toward the central tower where the High Archons conducted their ancient business. Teuma, stronger now but still far from recovered, stood at the bow of the lead boat as they approached. The sight of his home after weeks of captivity and desperate flight brought unexpected emotion welling up within him. "It's more beautiful than I remembered," he murmured. "And still unbreached," Dennis observed, steering the boat toward the river docks that served as Saelmark's primary entry point. "No sign of vampire activity in the surrounding territory." "The waiting," Celerin cautioned, scanning the seemingly peaceful landscape with wary eyes, "gathering strength for the assault that will inevitably follow. Then we must make the most of whatever time remains." Teuma replied, straightening his posture with effort. "The High Archons must be told everything. About the Mother, about Elria's true plans, about the artifact beneath the city." As their boats approached the docks, activity could be seen along the riverside. Elven guards in the distinctive silver and blue armor of Saelmark's defenders, moving with sudden purpose at the sight of the mixed company arriving on riverboats. "They've been watching for us," Seren noted. "Word of your escape must have reached them." Indeed, by the time they docked, a formal welcoming party had assembled. Not merely guards, but robed figures whose bearing marked them as members of the Archon circles. At their center stood a tall, silver-haired elf, whose stern features softened visibly at the sight of Teuma. Archon Lyria. Teuma identified her for his companions. "First among the Star Song Circle, and my mentor." As they disembarked, Lyria stepped forward, breaking protocol to embrace Teuma briefly, before stepping back to assess his condition with concern. "You return to us greatly diminished, old friend," she observed, noting his weakened state and the magical depletion evident to her trained senses. "But alive and bearing critical information," Teuma replied, gesturing to include his companions. "Thanks to the Rangers of the North and an unexpected ally." Lyria's gaze shifted to Celerin, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts as she studied his transformed state. "A child of Star Song, yet not entirely so anymore," she observed. "The Shadow Watch reported you lost." "Nearly so," Celerin acknowledged with a formal bow. "But circumstances evolved." "So I see." She returned her attention to Teuma. "The High Council awaits. Your escape from Mornathil and subsequent journey have been tracked as best we could manage. We know some of what transpired, but since there is much more to tell. More than you can imagine," Tamar confirmed grimly. "The threat we face is far greater than vampire conquest. The very fabric between realms is at risk." Lyria nodded, unsurprised. "Then we waste no time. Come, transportation awaits to take you to the Archon Tower. Your companions will be seen to with all honor due those who have preserved one of our most valuable members." As attendants moved forward to assist Teuma, he gestured for Celerin to join him. "He comes with me," he insisted. "His knowledge complements mine. Both are necessary for a complete understanding of what we face." Lyria hesitated only briefly before nodding her assent. "As you wish, though his presence in the High Council chamber will be unprecedented." "These are unprecedented times," Teuma replied simply. The Rangers, led by Tennis, prepared to remain at the docks. Their mission accomplished, they would rest briefly before beginning the journey back to their territories, where the war against vampire forces continued unabated. "Your service will not be forgotten," Teuma promised them, clasping arms with Tennis in the traditional warrior's farewell. "When this is over, if we survive what's coming, the alliance between elves and rangers will be stronger than ever before. Just make sure our losses weren't in vain," Tennis replied solemnly. "Captain Era and the others bought your passage with their lives. Honor that sacrifice by stopping whatever Elria has planned." "I will," Teuma vowed, "or die in the attempt." As the Rangers departed, Teuma and Celerin were escorted to an ornate carriage drawn by white horses, whose lineage traced back to the earliest days of elven settlement in Taria. Such conveyances were reserved for the highest ceremonies and most honored guests, a sign of how seriously the High Archons took Teuma's return. The journey through Saelmark's concentric rings would normally have been a slow progression through increasingly refined levels of elven society, from the outer merchant districts to the inner sanctums of learning and governance. But today, the carriage moved with unusual haste, bypassing the normal protocols as it carried its vital cargo directly to the heart of the city. Teuma gazed out at the familiar spires and graceful architecture, seeing it now through eyes changed by captivity and revelation. Beneath the beauty and serenity of Saelmark lay secrets. Secrets that could save or doom all of Taria, depending on how the High Archons chose to act upon them. "They will resist," Celerin observed quietly, sensing Teuma's thoughts. The idea that an artifact beneath their city could cause such devastation if disturbed, it challenges fundamental assumptions about Saelmark's security. "They will listen," Teuma replied, with more confidence than he felt. "They must. The evidence we bring is too compelling to ignore." As the carriage approached the central spire that housed the High Council chambers, Teuma mentally prepared himself for the most important presentation of his long life. Everything, the survival of elves, humans, even vampires themselves, depended on convincing the High Archons of a truth so fantastic it would test the limits of their ancient wisdom. The mother stood beneath the ruins of Mornathil. Elria plotted to harness her power rather than truly contain it. And beneath Saelmark itself lay not a weapon of salvation, but a key that could unlock destruction beyond imagining. The carriage stopped at the base of the gleaming tower. Guards opened the door, helping Teuma descend with deference to his weakened condition. Celerin followed, ignoring the barely concealed suspicion in the guards' eyes as they noticed his vampire characteristics. Elria led them toward the tower entrance, where massive doors carved from a single piece of ancient heartwood stood open in welcome. Above the entrance, inscribed in flowing elven script, were words that had guided Archon philosophy for millennia. "Knowledge preserves where ignorance destroys. Wisdom acts where folly hesitates." Never had those words seemed more apt or more ominous than they did now. As they passed beneath the inscription and entered the tower, Teuma straightened his shoulders, despite his exhaustion. The final battle for Taria's future was about to begin, not with swords or sorcery, but with truth and the courage to act upon it. Behind them, beyond the city's protective boundaries, the Blackmoon rose in the daylight sky. Larger than ever before, its surface now clearly marbled with pulsing red veins like blood vessels beneath pale skin. The mother's awakening continued, her influence stretching across the land like a shadow that no light could dispel. But the belief that all this was the mother herself, even to once such as Elria Sonia, was not quite true. Elria Sonia, prepared for the culmination of plans millennia in the making. The Archon had reached Saelmark, as expected. The pieces were in place. The final move in the ancient game was about to begin. Vesria knelt before him, her ruined face a testament to her encounter with Teuma in the marshes. "The invasion force is ready, my lord," she reported, hatred giving strength to her still healing body. "We await only your command. All the High Lords are ready." "Patience," Elria counseled, his black eyes fixed on a scrying pool that showed the white tower of Saelmark in perfect detail. "Let the Archon deliver his warnings. Let the High Council debate and deliberate. Their caution works in our favor. And if they decide to reinforce the binding rather than remove the artifact?" Vesria questioned. Elrian's smile held no warmth, only the certainty of one who had accounted for every possibility. Then we proceed with the direct approach. Either way, the mother will be freed, and her power will flow to me alone. The final battle for Taria had begun not with the fall of Mornathil, but with its deliberate abandonment. Not with defeat, but with a strategic withdrawal. Not with loss, but with the imminent fulfillment of an ancient vampire lord's ultimate ambition. Teuma and Celerin entered the High Council chamber, bearing knowledge that might change the course of history, if anyone had the wisdom to heed it in time. But, in all the workings of Elria and the elves, King Suvasel had continued his war. The dwarfs too sought to destroy Elria Sonia once and for all. The place where Elria Sonia hid until the right moment had been discovered. Though the workings of dwarfs were not always shared with the elves or humans, and as such, few would ever know how the dwarfs managed to find a place so hidden. "Let's light these crackling fang-toothed pale faces," a dwarf said to his Hammersong commander. The sheer amount of dwarven dust used in this attack was unheard of, but it would be worth it, they prayed. There was a massive explosion, and to all who witnessed it, Elria Sonia and all with him perished in an explosion, or stone and fire. Or did he?